The world ended in the 14th century. Well, not our world, but the vibrant world of medieval Christendom, which had thrived in the High Middle Ages. The importance of this world can hardly be overstated for the Europe that would emerge. The High Middle Ages marked the emergence of many things which we consider to be typically medieval, such as knights in shining armor, feudalism, the Crusades, and landless serfs, as well as monks riding away in monasteries. However, in addition to kings clashing in bloody wars, of which there were plenty, the High Middle Ages also saw the growth of Europe's population from 35 to 80 million, as well as the growth of trade and cities, common law, and state formation. Let us examine the High Middle Ages, economically, culturally, and politically. Economically, the High Middle Ages were a period of tremendous growth. This is in large part due to the inventions of new technologies, such as the heavy or horse-powered plow and the three-field system, both of which allowed farmers to grow drastically more food. The increase in food supply allowed the population of Europe to swell from 35 to 80 million in the period, and the settlement of various new villages. The High Middle Ages also saw a growth in the number of cities. The Rhineland in Germany went from having 8 cities in the 12th century to 50 in the 13th century. The period also saw a growth in the size of cities, as many people tried to move to cities. There was the saying, Stadtluft macht frei, or city air makes you free. This is because people in cities enjoyed more rights and more economic opportunity than people in the countryside. Fun German sayings aside, not everyone living in towns were equal. While fee labor does go up in the period, full town rights were only given to those who could pay, and their servants and other poor people living in the city were not given the same rights. The High Middle Ages also saw an uptick in international trade. This was spearheaded by Italian merchant republics, such as Venice, Genoa, and Pisa. Somewhat uniquely for the period, these major mercantile republics were, well, republics. This republican form of government was enabled by their large burgher or wealthy merchant populations, which expected rights and representation. As we will see, these republics were far from the norm. Christianity was a dominant force in the High Middle Ages. At the beginning of the period, Christianity had only recently spread to large portions of Eastern Europe, and parts of Northern and Eastern Europe were still unevangelized. Poland and Hungary were both major kingdoms which converted to Christianity in the 11th century. However, both saw revolts against Christianity. In Poland, Christianity was revoked and paganism restored. However, Casimir I was able to restore Christianity to Poland. In Hungary, Stephen I was able to convert the country and go on a campaign of centralization and modernization, which would see the permanent Christianization of Hungary. One of the challenges faced was a lack of priests to help run the churches in newly evangelized territories. However, with the support of kings and a growing number of priests, Christianity proved a permanent feature of Eastern European life. Importantly, many of the most devout would live lives of poverty as monks, where they would spend their time reading and copying books. Many of these books contained ancient knowledge, such as the writings of Aristotle. The combination of writers like Aristotle and Christian theology would help lead to an intellectual movement called scholasticism, which attempted to rationalize and philosophically explain Christian theology. This scholastic movement ended up spreading rapidly, as many people became very devout and wished to become monks or nuns. As monks or nuns, they would live in chapter houses, often for new mendicant orders. And these houses would all require a library. And many of these libraries would be open to the community or to schools. Some of these schools would grow into universities, such as the University of Paris, founded in 1200, which would be one of the most prestigious universities in Europe, training priests as well as various secular officials from all over Europe. This growth in quality and quantity of education led to what is referred to as the Renaissance of the 13th century, which saw the development of Gothic architecture with its flying buttresses and large stained glass windows, as well as the development of the literary genre of romance, which saw knights in shining armors and knights errant going on heroic quests. In the High Middle Ages, politics were heavily based off of personal relations, particularly in the case of feudalism, which emphasized the personal relationship between vassals and their liege, or a king and his nobles and their peasants. In theory, these relationships were mutually beneficial and entailed obligations on the part of both parties, such as a king needing to defend his nobles and nobles needing to protect their peasants. While there are examples of kings taking this obligation very seriously, such as Louis IX launching investigations into his own governments about the mistreatment of peasants, this is the exception, and typically this was a one-way relationship of exploitation. There were various forms of political competition in the Middle Ages. One form of political competition was the conflict between secular rulers for control of territory. These secular rulers would be fighting for their families, as opposed to for their countries. The borders between kingdoms and empires themselves were actually quite fluid, and oftentimes kings or dukes would control territory within multiple kingdoms or empires. While this flexibility made it possible to arrive at peaceful settlements, it also meant that there was infinite complexity for medieval lords to fight over. Another area of political competition was Caesaropapism, or the struggle between the king, or the Caesar, and the Pope. The Pope believed that he had ultimate authority over the church, and kings believed that they should have authority over the church within their own country. This conflict came to a head with the investiture controversy, where the Pope believed that it was his right to pick every bishop in the Catholic Church, and kings believed that they should be allowed to pick the bishops in their own countries. This conflict would eventually resolve on the side of the Pope, but it would lay the seed for future conflict. Medieval rulers often tried to centralize their control of territory, forming what we now know as states. One way to centralize a state is by creating a capital. Paris was chosen as the capital of France in 1194, after Philip II Augustus was defeated by Richard the Lionheart and had all of his court records captured. The kings decided that it would make more sense to keep their administration in one place, and they chose Paris as it was already a major center of culture, learning, and a wealthy city. Medieval rulers also seek to centralize their control by forming working relations with the nobility. France achieved this to the favor of the king, with all of the nobles gradually subjugating themselves to the king, and England achieved this to the favor of the nobility, with a noble revolt leading to the Magna Carta. In 1215, King John was forced to sign this document, which gave rights to the British nobles and limited the power of the king. Kings also implemented systems of law in order to normalize the legal system within their kingdoms. The implementation of these policies, as well as other policies such as the minting of coins with the king's face, led to the formation of many of the modern states we know today. The High Middle Ages would end cataclysmically with a combination of plague and famine that hit Europe in the 14th century. The Europe that would emerge is the Europe of the Renaissance and the early modern period, fundamentally altered from the Europe of the High Middle Ages.